Good evening, friends. Today we have ShriKant with us. We have been talking about a lot of managerial, leadership, mindset kind of issues in last 3-4 days. But today we are talking about something doing. We are talking about testing, behavior-driven development and acceptance test-driven development. So we will ask a lot of testing related questions to ShriKant. But before we start the conversation, let's know ShriKant. So ShriKant, can you tell us something about you? So we start conversation on ATDD.
Yeah, so I have been working in the software industry for the last 16 years, and for around first 9 years, I worked in the waterfall, and then moved towards agile software development part. Uh, so during that, I worked as a developer, as an architect, as a coach. So right now, I've been working as a coach for the last 3 4 years, and my interests are in DevOps, Agile, plus Lean Startup and ATDD. So I process part plus the engineering practices part as well. So this is about me, and currently I've been working with GlobalLogic as a director engineer.
So do you still do coding, or do you still write something which get executed on computer?
Yeah, definitely. I am hands-on coder yet. So quite recently, I was building something related to the grids, and there I was using specification by example, and the frameworks were Jeb and Selenium. So I did a presentation on that as well. Hello.
I think I had some connection issue today. Sorry for that. Let's restart the conversation. Sorry, friends. So today we have ShriKant with us, and ShriKant was talking about his experience, how he worked as a developer, technical architect, and nowadays working a lot in DevOps environment. And I was talking about that. Do you still do coding? And he was sharing his recent things. So let's start the conversation towards acceptance test driven development. And you started when you were talking about that you are hands-on, you were talking about that you are doing something with a specification driven development.
Yeah.
That's the word I guess you used. Now
Yeah.
I think good amount of people are getting confused between specification driven development, behavior driven development, test driven development. So what all these flavors are all about? Are the same thing, or is there any difference in these?
So basically, as far as these terms are concerned, they are all same. But the thing is that specification, by example, or specifying, I mean, is more about the communication rather than any tools, and basically specifying collaboratively. So whenever basically you associate the test term with anything, then you by definition think that, oh, it is related to the tester, so what should I do about it? I mean, I don't have anything to do about it. And test means also something related technical. So I'm talking from the business person perspective. So these all questions come into picture, but what we are talking exactly is the specifying collaboratively, uh, uh, sitting together. So we have a requirement, and based on that, a lot of people ask questions from the different perspectives. So testers are from testing perspective, developer ask from developing perspective, and then business analysts may be asking from the business perspective, and stakeholders may be giving their own inputs on that. So basically, coming to the on the same page, plus making sure that whatever we write can be understood by anybody. So that we write things, we specify specifications in terms of natural languages. So you can just write the specification in English, and it can be understood by anybody. So we are not really including any kind of technical jargon or frameworks when we are where we are creating the specifications. Uh, and basically, the idea is to have some kind of defining a behavior of the feature, that this is how this particular feature is going to behave. Fine. And then based on that, you can basically the end result may be like, based on that, developers do the development, and then maybe creating the regression test cases based on those specifications. But specification in itself are written in the natural languages, which become executable spec at the end. So this is how. So basically, specification in itself are written in natural languages, but can be implemented by BDD or behavior-driven development tools, or maybe there are other tools as well, like fitness report-driven tools. So you can implement those with multiple tools actually.
Okay, so if I understand it rightly, it's more about writing the specification in example format, using the natural language, keeping the technical things aside, and writing in a way that all the developer testers as well as the business analyst can understand it, or can communicate using it, and gradually they become executable. So you know that this specification is getting met or not met because you write it in a way that it gives a pass fail result. Is my understanding right?
Yes, I mean, first and foremost is that collaboratively defining the specification, that is the most important thing apart from any kind of tooling and stuff like that. So basically, everybody is on the same page what we are going to implement, and then when then developers know that this is what needs to be implemented, and this is the acceptance criteria for which I need to write the code. So it becomes a specification for them, and then it becomes a kind of regression test when we basically I mean, write the test cases around it. So it is, I mean, it becomes a part of multiple things. After that, basically the most important aspect of it is that it becomes the living documentation. I think everybody knows that as we are moving towards agile software development, the cycles or the iterations are becoming very small. So we may be having 2 weekly iterations, and sometimes we have the weekly iterations as well. So during that time, it may happen that requirements keep on changing or user stories keep on changing quite rapidly. So making sure that your documentation, your test cases are in sync with your code, it becomes a very difficult situation. So specification, by example, try to solve that kind of problem. So whatever your code does, you are able to see that in terms of the specifications. Are you still with me?
Reverse is happening, Shrikant. You were expected to have trouble today, and here I am getting their troubles because you were expected to have troubles. Uh, uh, okay, unfortunately, we were doing great hangouts, and okay, too much. Now, you were talking about specification writing collaboratively. Now, when I did a little bit study related to these things, when I was doing some research and finally preparing our presentation and content for various trainings, it looks like that specification driven development is too like a rule model. In our business analysis term, we used to create a rule model which talks about that if A rule is true, B rule is true, then you should get C as a result. So you talk about condition 1, 2, 3, and then you talk about that if these two conditions are true, you should get condition finally some satisfaction criteria. Is that the rule model? Rule model associates well with doing specification driven development?
So
Or
basically, I think what we are talking about is a kind of behavior-driven development kind of style where we define the business acceptance criteria in terms of given, when, then conditions.
okay.
So basically, as far as the specifications are concerned, they can be written in behavior-driven development way. But as I said, like there are other ways to do the same thing as well using scriptness and stuff like that. So what I'm trying to say is that uh, I mean uh, with given when then kind of format, you write the specifications, uh, but it is not the role of only business analyst, or is the role of some testers. It's the role of the whole team. Anybody can write it. Anybody can understand in that fashion. So apart from the given when then, you also start adding some examples. So basically, whenever you say, for example, like you give an idea of a requirement, and whenever you say that, okay, I don't really understand it, then basically you say that, okay, fine, you don't understand it. Let me give an example, and then you start giving an example. So when you start giving example, things become much more clearer, and you can really quantify what exactly you mean with that. So apart from working in the given when then way or language, the team also start adding the examples with that.
Okay, but I think this specification, like this acceptance test driven development approach, requires some level of top level modeling, because when we talk about examples, we focus on a particular scenario or a part of the of the solution, but we may need to create a overall model or a view or a big picture where we can see that overall connectivity of various modules. Is that
Uh,
right?
it has nothing to do with the overall architecture or overall modules. It is
Mm-hmm.
just related to the user story itself. So, for example, I say that there is a business rule that if if you take two books in a library, or you purchase two books from a bookshop, then I will give you 10% discount. So so basically you say that if example is one book is one, are you giving uh, any discount? No. So when you go to two, then you are giving in a discount of 10%. And there can be other scenarios as well, like if you are going towards 4 and more, then there can be other business too, for example. So you're adding those examples. One is means no, 10, 2 means 10%, and 4 plus means something else. So these examples add to the specification itself. So I mean, when you talk about what, I mean, whenever I'm talking about specifications, then basically they are all about what. They are not about how they needs to be implemented. Fine.
Okay.
So in that case, you don't really care how they're going to be implemented using modules or this and that. From the user story point of view, definitely you want to slice this further, but that is again based on what needs to be done instead of how it needs to be done.
Okay, so we create a user story map, we have top level epics, we know about the system, and then we can come to an investor story. When we talk about their acceptance, we can talk about their
Yeah,
business story.
exactly. Are you still there?
Mm, I think this is becoming a problem. So what I suggest is that if I get disconnected, you can start taking questions from the Q&A app. So maybe there are few questions. So audience, I request you to please keep posting your questions. So whenever there's a glitch in my side, maybe you can pick up that slice. Uh, does that work, Shrikant? Because we already have few questions. So whenever I get disconnected, please pick up those questions and start talking about it. Will that work? Can you see these questions in a right
Yeah,
panel?
yeah. I think we can see that, and
Yeah. So
certain questions
yeah,
from.
because just keep it for a break because it looks like in my network connection there is some issue. So I expect it may happen again. It was not there till we started this hangout. So in case it happens, use this as an inventory item and pick them, pull them up,
Sure.
and so we continue the flow. Okay, so we
So
understood.
yeah. So just want to take one question from Sumit, and he says that when we talk about specification, doesn't that mean we are going into too much design details? So it is not kind of mini waterfall within the iteration. So as I mentioned before, that specification by itself is nothing about design. I mean, it is all about what needs to be done. And when we are defining the specifications, then basically we are defining the acceptance criteria. So this is the user story. This is the future we are trying to create. So what do you mean when it is done? And so with the given when then and examples, you can define that in a collaborative way. So so basically, it has nothing to do with the design at this point of time.
Great. So let's move forward. We understood what this is specification by example and ATDD as a concept is all about. How do we start with this? So if, for example, primarily if you want to start an automated acceptance test driven development, what should be our starting point?
So basically, we call it as acceptance test driven development as well. So basically, what you need to do is you just need a the team together as part of the communication, set up for the collaboration, and uh, and basically they start having a discussion about the user story itself, and then start try to specifying what exactly it means as when we say acceptance is done. The important, I think we need to differentiate between the test case and the specification over here. Uh, Specifications are the subset of the entire test cases. So, for example, like and specification are just enough information to basically tell the behavior of the application. So, for example, like I'll give you one example. So, uh, in my previous example, where I said that two books, if you give, then you will get the 10% discount. But so it is enough for specifying the user story itself. But then from a testing point of view, you can add many more things. You can say, okay, fine, instead of two, let me put null as well. So then what will happen if I pass the null? So that is, I mean, that is a good test case, but at the same time, it is not required to really define the behavior of the feature itself. So there is a kind of differentiation over here that I mean, there can be many more test cases, but specification is just enough information to really define the behavior of the feature. So basically, when you sit together as a team, you define those those specifications, giving by various examples. So, like for example, this is one book, then what will happen, or two books, what will happen. You don't need to have three books because more than two books is 10%, for example. So that way you define the specification in the given when then format, and that becomes a kind of executable spec for the developers at that from that point of onwards. So what it means is that you have defined your test cases or acceptance test cases in a even before you wrote a single line of code, and that is the beauty of it, that in the Selenium or any other kind of tool, you can write test cases only when you have something in your hand. The code is in your hand and you can execute it, and then only you can basically write the test cases on top of that. Here you are writing the test cases even before writing a single line of code, and it becomes a kind of criteria for the developers to implement it further. And then so that's how it works basically. And instead of developers or testers focusing only on the checking part, that okay, fine, this is what needs to be implemented, let me see how is it really implementing this or not. So instead of going into that cycle, which is not required from the testing perspective really, testers can do other important things. They can really focus towards certain kind of exploratory testing and usability part of it, and looking at it like whether there can be a better approach to do it or not. So instead of looking at the checking part only, okay, whether this particular feature is doing what it's supposed to do, they can focus on other parts. So that is how the whole cycle of specification by example is really implemented.
Okay, I'm just hoping that I will remain connected because always we can close a conversation and I get disconnected. Here, if I understand it well, first, when we discuss about requirement and specification for a given user story, we talk with criterias, maybe in a given when and then format. And we talk about only sufficient examples and criterias which are good enough to communicate the intent of that requirement. We don't have
Yes.
to go into a boundary values, exception criterias, negative values, because they may be a good test cases, but they are not needed as a business requirement communication tool. So first we limit there. Second, the beauty of tools which supports BDD is that those examples or those test criteria or acceptance criteria can be automated even before we do the coding. So we make a given condition, we make the when condition, we make the then condition for the sufficiently defined and acceptance criteria, and we know before we code that these are the criteria which are failing and we need to pass them. Am
Yeah.
I right till here?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
you are correct. Only thing I want to add is that just want to focus on a little bit more on that. Why it is important to have just enough details about the requirements or the acceptance criteria is because like these specifications will be treated as a living documentation. So when you say any kind of documentation, then you don't want to add the whole world in terms of documentation. You have to really struggle like what exactly this feature do, because it has so many other test cases which I don't really care about as of now, but I just want to see what this feature really does. So if you have all those test cases as a part of the specification, then the living documentation doesn't remain living documentation anymore, and it kind of comes out as a chaos. So that's another reason basically.
Okay, so let's talk about the doing part, how part related to acceptance test driven development or behavior driven development. What kind of skills needed? So, for example, if my team wants to do behavior driven development, what kind of skill developer tester should have or a business analyst should have in order to do it?
So I think as far as this just specifying, defining the specification itself, we don't need any kind of skills. I mean, anybody, any business stakeholder, any business analyst, tester, or whoever has a good domain knowledge can do that, because that's the whole point of specification by example anyway. But when you start implementing it as part of it as a kind of test case, then basically there are many tools available, and most of the kind of famous thing is Cucumber. Cucumber was really created first of all in Ruby, and but now it has been ported in across the languages. So depending on the kind of platform you're using, you can find out like what works for you. For example, for .NET, there is a SpecFlow, which works for the .NET, and for different other languages, there are different other tools. So, from the developer's perspective and tester's perspective, these are, you see like what works on the Cucumber specification and start using that. But depending on Cucumber is not the only way or solution as part of the BDD, but there are other solutions available as well. So, I mean, I can say that there are many solutions available, but depending on your context, you need to find what works for you.
Okay, so first we need to select a tool. But for example, I have selected a tool, but as a business analyst or as a tester, I need to have a coding background? Should I be able to write something in C Sharp or Java in order to use this thing?
See, from the from I mean, I would like to divide it into two parts. One is like from the writing of the specification itself. Specification writing the specification itself should not require any kind of framework, any kind of scripting, nothing. And that's the whole point, because the anybody means business stakeholders should be able to read it the way they read the English language. Fine. So that is one part. Second part is you are going to implement that as a kind of acceptance criteria or executable spec for your test for your code. Then in that case, definitely you need to have the programming understanding to implement that. And these days, testers are becoming a software development engineer in test. instead of just manual testers. And that's what I see moving forward, that just having a manual testing background will not be sufficient. People want to make sure that apart from what you do, they want to make sure that instead of having another automation engineer to do the automation test, uh, world want, I mean, most of the projects what I see is that they want to have the same person doing both things, manual testing plus the automation testing as well. That kind of background is necessary to have moving forward.
Okay, so one needs to understand, say one language at least. So be it .NET, Java, Ruby, because there are tools which can work in these languages. But you need to have a grip on a given language, depending upon your code base, depending upon your environment you are working in, and accordingly you need to have some level of programming experience.
Yeah.
So now we are mixing two things again. We when we were reading specification, we were reading
So, wanna let me take one question. Basically, grooming in the user story in more detail beyond the customer value, which has basic intention of the writing in the user story. I do not understand that. Uh, Another question is, can you elaborate BDD more with examples? So BDD as a whole, uh, basically is writing the acceptance criteria in natural language, using given, when, then syntax. So for example, given is over there is a kind of precondition to whatever you're trying to do. Then basically, when is the real acceptance test case which you want to execute, and then is the kind of assertion you want to make sure that it really happens when the test case executes. Fine. So, for example, I say that there is a user story which says that if you have, if you buy two books, then basically uh, you will get, you if you buy two or more books, then you will get 30% of discount. In that case, given may not be anything, but when is like, if when I buy two books, then I get 10% discount. Another test case may be like, if I buy one book, then I don't get any discount. So when I buy two books, I get 10% discount. When I buy one book, then I don't get any discount. So this is a simple example of a beauty test case. Just trying to answer the question from Sumit.
Okay, I was trying to ask is that we had a two type of requirements. One is like we want to have the live document, bare minimum acceptance criteria, which communicates the intent. But as things are getting into automation, so we got an intent. We are trying to automate those things, and at this point of time, tester may want to include more points. They may want to include boundary value. They may want to include many things. So is it something that they elaborate, they extend the same test setup, or we should do something else about those tests?
So first thing is that definitely we will be elaborating those specifications with more test cases. But at the same time, I would like to limit over there, because whenever we talk about functional test cases, or any kind of test cases which involve UI or stuff like that, then we already know that they are difficult to create first of all, and difficult to maintain. So if we think from the point of view of testing pyramid, so the foundation of the testing pyramid is unit test cases supported with the integration test cases, and then basically you may be having uh, uh, is a layer of the functional test cases, and then on top of that manual test cases. But by definition, the foundation of the unit test cases is around 70% of test cases. So basically, when we say that if you give null, is it doing that or not, and things like that should be covered within the unit test cases itself, because they are faster to implement, faster to execute. And then basically, when you move further into the pyramid, where we say that 10 to 15% part of the test should be in the functional test cases part, then basically that's where we look at from the end-to-end perspective. So we have enough information from the acceptance criteria. We can add some more test cases around it. But again, we have to really make sure that we are not doing too much in that layer, because that is supposed to create the problem of of the maintainability and the creation execution time and all that stuff.
But do you see an anti-pattern where people are trying to use that BDD as a replacement for unit testing, as a replacement of test-driven development?
So I would say that if I think the anti pattern is that when we try to test, when we think about the automation, test automation as just the functional test automation. So what we are trying to do, we are trying to create the 100% of test coverage using test automation, functional test automation. Then that is a big anti pattern, because it is really hard to maintain. It is really hard to create and execute all that. So it may be happening that your test cases itself are taking 12 hours or more than that. So that is a big anti-pattern. But using BDD in itself in the unit test cases is not an anti-pattern. Is you can use it in the unit test cases as well. Because personally, what I see is that it gives a good amount of expression when you think in terms of the natural language. So in the unit test cases also, I can specify the same thing, that given this I enter this information, and I should expect this and this. Because what I have seen is that whenever I try to do write the J unit test cases, for example, then in order to specify the intent of my test cases, then the length of the method itself used to become very long. Fine, because otherwise it's very difficult. Otherwise you can say test cases 2, test cases 3, but then when I want to specify what exactly this test case is doing, then the length of that becomes very big. So basically I want to do the same thing which BDD format really gives me the freedom to, that I can specify what is given, what is the precondition, what is the condition which I'm trying to test, and what is the assertion. So basically what I'm trying to say is that in the unit test cases as well, you can use BDD format.
So if I understand you rightly, you are saying that the format and thought process of BDD can be applied at all levels of testing pyramid, but
Yeah.
the tools which are primarily associated with BDD should be kept at functional level only. When you get at a detail level, unit level, where the 70% of effort should be going, you should use unit testing tools, but you may use the thought process which is coming from BDD.
Yes, basically the approach of given when, then you can apply at any level. But as far as basically thinking that I will do the test coverage of 50 or 60 or 70% on only on the functional level, then you are going into the wrong path.
Okay, and does this acceptance test driven development also triggers refactoring? Like people usually focus refactoring associated with unit testing and doing coding and then refining the code based on the design principles. But is there something which can be triggered by the acceptance test driven development for
So
redesigning
basically,
and
the
refactoring?
refactoring is done on the top level. For example, uh, right now, so as I said before, that the specification, by example, is a living documentation. Fine. So now I understand what exactly has been implemented into my system. Now, what I want to do is I want to extend my system to do something else. Fine. So at that point of time, based on that high level thinking, I can understand that how to my system as of now on the holistic level, so that these condition or these specification have been satisfied by these things, and now in order to add something else on top of that, these things needs to be touched and need to be refactored and things like that. So basically, when you think about the system as a whole, then and you want to refactor that, you want to add more functionality to it, then the living documentation really helps the people around, so that they exactly know at this point of time what my system does. Fine. So you don't need to look back into the documentation, which becomes stale any day, anyway, every day. So here you really look at what my system does right now, what it's supposed to do, and based on that you can do the refactoring.
Okay, so I dig further on the same topic, but in a different language. Are you saying that the behavior driven development or acceptance test driven development more associates with the black box testing, or is it also going till white box? Like, do I need to know the coding implementation, or do I verify how it is getting implemented when I do behavior driven development or acceptance test driven development at a functional level?
So I mean, they uh, you definitely need to do some kind of making sure that whatever the assertions you are defining on the function level, they are being satisfied by the code itself. So so basically, when you implement the test case, then definitely you go into the white box and make sure that whatever specifications are there, then they are implemented in the right fashion. But when you want to read the specification, you want to execute the specification. So for example, I know that for this functionality I want to implement, I want to run these specifications. Fine. Then I don't need to look into the white box, or I want to look at what this living documentation does. Again, I don't need to look at the white box, but when implementing it, I want to really make sure that it really does what it is supposed to do, and the testers also can see like what it is doing is really doing the right thing or not. So there is
So
a mix of it, like living documentation plus execution of the test cases or specifications, and implementing the test specifications. So when we implement the test specifications, then or you validate the specifications, then in that case you go into the white box. Otherwise, you remain into the black box.
okay, so if I understood it right, when we talk about specification, we just give an example, we write given, when, and then condition in English. Then we go further and we talk about the classes which should be verifying, or the functions which should be giving a desired result in given, when, and then scenario.
Yeah.
And when we talk about that, it becomes white box, because you should be knowing how you verify, or how the test verify that
Yes.
given condition is getting met when condition is meeting.
Yes, because implementation can be done in a various fashion. So you can, what you can do is you can implement a Selenium test case inside this specification, and which basically does all that thing. You can also have a service-based test case where you don't really interact with the UI, but interact with the service layer and see like this is how it is. I mean, is satisfying the criteria. So implementation is dependent on the project and the context, but basically the specifications remain same. And by definition, in the specification, there should not be any relation of how it is going to be implemented. It is more related towards the business rules instead of how it is supposed to be implemented.
True. So if I for like you added two statements now, the implementation can be done using Selenium. So I am assuming that we are using some WebDriver or some interface where the person who is implementing may no need to know about the class implementation. He just used the UI interface as a satisfying criteria for given when and then. Uh, is it right? My understanding?
So again, you don't need to really look at the specification in terms of like when I click on this and this and this, then this really happens. Instead of that, you may be having a business rule that if I change this value in this screen, then these are the changes which I'm expecting. Because implementation can differ. Why I'm emphasizing on that is that, for example, right now I'm using a UI. Fine. Now, in near future, that UI itself changes, or that UI may be implemented for the different interfaces for the mobile, for different things, and or as I said, like UI completely changes, but your business rule never changes. So your business rule remains same, and internal implementation can change basically.
So why I was trying to figure it out is that if we in a context where implementation has to stop at that level, then it can become a pure black box testing where you don't need to know real implementation of that particular functionality, and you may just call a service like the example you gave. There could be a service which are published which verifies given when and then condition, or maybe an object or something which you pick up and say that if the value of this particular field is changing, this is how the remaining field should change.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
so
if we have,
basically, you
yeah,
in any way you need to write the code to have that kind of behavior. Anyway, so
okay,
whatever,
so
basically, whether you do it using so basically, for example, like if you are using UI, then you would like some Selenium code to execute your screens. If
yeah,
you are using a service for, you will be writing some code to call the service. So I mean, I'm not saying that you need to write the entire code, but you will be writing some code to to execute the
yeah.
specifications.
So definitely you need to write the code, but you may not be interacting with the real implementation code if you use the service or UI layer. But if you don't use that, then you may end up interacting with the real implementation code.
Yeah, so basically, again, there are different patterns of doing that so that you don't need to worry about the real exact implementation, and those things are abstracted out. But I think we can take that out as of this discussion, because that will be going a lot
Okay,
deeper in
too
this.
much, too much for it. So why I was getting into it, because I wanted to identify the division between a tester and developer. So if my real implementation and coding is kind of independent, and then tester may do the automation independently without worrying about how the developer is changing their classes, refactoring their designing, changing the name of the classes, etc., etc. And if this thing is not possible, then it is generating into a close coupling, and we
Yeah,
how
basically,
do we
as
manage
I
that?
said, like there are different patterns of doing the same, so that you are abstracted out from the internal changes or implementation, and so basically, for example, there is a page object pattern, and there are other patterns for from the UI point of view. So they abstract out the internal changes from the testing person, and that layer is written on top of whatever UI is you're generating basically. So that is basically possible.
Okay, okay, and that is something preferred, or how it is done. So if the team
That
is
is
using,
definitely preferred. I mean, you want to make sure that in case of there are changes, then there is minimum changes in terms of implementation as well. So, for example, right, so far I talked about some patterns which can be used, but there are different tools as well. Like instead of Selenium, people are using JEP these days, because with the Selenium there is too much changes, or in terms of the test cases, and JEP provide uh, much more maintainable solution, so that in case there are changes as well, you don't need to change your test cases. So compared to Selenium, people are preferring JEP these days.
Okay, and it makes developers independent. They keep doing their refactoring as per the
Yeah,
things
basically,
are emerging.
I mean, if the outcome of your changes is not changing my test condition, I don't care what changes you're doing, what refactoring you're trying to do. So there are separate parts.
Okay. So now we are kind of approaching our last segment. Any advices? So we have a question, I think, from Sumit. You have taken the first one. Let us see what is this about before we talk about some things. When we are adding too much detailed specification in user stories, are we spending more engineering time in user story grooming? Does it make an ROI, or how some specification use case like compliance? So I think you must have read it. So what do you want to talk about? Like, I
So
think the worry
basically,
which we shared. Yeah.
my take on that is that uh, either you spend some time in doing the right specification so that everybody is on the same page, you are working on the right thing, right product, fine. So you spend some time on that, or you suffer in the sprint, fine. So what happens is, like, you don't have a good amount of information about the user story. You said yes, we will do it, and then when you start doing it, you find, oh, we don't have the answer of this question or that question, and let's ask this question to the on-site people at the customer side. And then they get back after two. I mean, if the whole cycle takes, for example, 5 days, and then you find out that the kind of productivity which you are supposed to do or create, I mean, that is suffering because you are not having enough information about about your user stories. So basically, what I find is that sometimes, like, when you have the backlog grooming session beforehand, and you are defining these specifications already, then sometimes when you first say that, okay, this on this user story we don't have enough information yet, and then you stop working on that user story then and there, fine. So this is one scenario. Another scenario is that you did not do it, and then that user story went into the sprint. Then it becomes the responsibility of the team that they basically do it as part of the sprint, and they may be spending a lot of time in to and fro, which really affects the productivity of the team. So I really believe on the definition of ready backlog grooming, and as you to use, and backlog grooming in technical terms can happen using specification by example, and that really helps when people really start working on these use stories, because they just need to focus on the implementation instead of focusing on so many questions and wasting time on that.
Great. So final segment. I know you would be available in our Discuss Agile conference, and many of the audience can come and interact with you. But I want to ask you about the advice you want to give to the testing community, because there are good amount of testers who are confused about their career progression, about where manual testers especially. So what kind of advice you want to give to testing professionals who are into manual testing?
So first of all, I mean, I would say that there are. I mean, when I talk to different organizations, so basically they still have. They don't want to really forego the people who have good amount of domain understanding. So when I think about the manual testers and good manual testers, then I think about domain experts, and they are really much more really required as of now, and then they will be required moving forward as well. But if you're just a manual tester, and you are not a domain expert, then you may be in trouble in the moving forward, because the focus now is moving towards automation, and there is a reason about it. Like, think about it that if I'm working on iteration by iteration ways, and I'm accumulating all the regression test cases as part of my tech. So what happens is, after 3 or 4 iteration, apart from my test cases for the current sprint, I have to make sure that regression of the previous iteration is also done. So if I'm dependent only on the manual testing, then it is very simple that either I need to add more testers, or I need to spend more time in the testing. Only way to do is that the regression can be done in automated fashion. So automation is the key moving forward. Uh, People around the world are moving towards a designation like software development engineering test. So that, I think, that is the way moving forward, and people should learn automation. And yeah, that's not, I mean, it looks maybe daunting, but I have seen that many people are learning languages and learning the automation themselves, and that should not be a big problem. So basically, I would say that uh, domain experts will be in demand, and definitely automation is in demand.
So as agile is changing the way of doing development, we also need to change to adapt to the new development, because it's
Definitely,
not only the
I would
software.
say one thing on the software development, that software development is a kind of treadmill. You need to run, you need to keep on running, or you will fall down. So either you learn based on the changing environment, or you will be out.
I know. So thanks, Shrikant, and sorry for the interruptions which we got today. I think this was kind of unusual, but I hope we will have good amount of interaction with you during our Discuss Agile conference. And thanks for taking time out and sharing your insight on acceptance test driven development or behavior driven development.
Thank you, Sakir.
Thank you,
It was a
Shrikant.
pleasure to talk to you.